Hey there, it's Tom Ryan, founder and CEO of ICR. Before we get into the next episode, I wanted to ask that you subscribe to the show. It'll help us get even more unique and interesting guests on the podcast and in turn continue to educate management teams and the growing ecosystem that creates value for fast-growing private and public companies. And while you're at it, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Very much appreciated.
We're the only digital media company that has successfully gone to cable and built a cable channel. That's never happened before. Nobody's done what we've done.
At this point, most Americans have heard of Newsmax, but regardless of your political leanings, the company's growth in recent years has been undeniable.
At the end of the day, we reach about 40 million people regularly, and Reuters' study last year showed that we were one of the top 12 media brands in the United States for news.
My name is Tom Ryan, and this is Welcome to the Arena, the ICR podcast. Each week, I sit down with today's business leaders to give you an inside scoop on some of America's most prosperous public companies, their origins, their challenges, and the keys to their success. Chris Ruddy is the CEO of Newsmax Media, which trades under the symbol NMAX. Chris began his career as a journalist at the New York Post and the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review before founding Newsmax in 1998, and today it's one of the nation's leading broadcasting and digital media companies. Chris joins us today to talk about the public perception of Newsmax, the rationale behind their recent IPO, and their plans to turn their massive reach into future profits. Let's enter the arena with Chris Ruddy. So you started the company back in 1998. That's actually when I started ICR, so we've been kind of doing our thing for a long time. But you started initially as kind of a digital platform. Why did you establish the company that way? And what did you see in the market where you're just like, hey, you know what, I'm going to go for this?
Well, I was a print journalist back in the day. I had worked at the New York Post, and I was at the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review. I was at the Hoover Institution at Stanford, and I still have ink in my veins. But I saw the power of the internet. I remember the Drudge Report. Remember that? And it was linking to a lot of my stories at the Pittsburgh paper, and thought, wow, this is incredible. You don't need any gatekeepers anymore. You can reach the whole country. Before, unless you were at the New York Times or ABC News, nobody knew about what you were writing.
Yeah.
And so that was just a wake-up call to me of how technology was transforming the media. I decided to start a web company. I had $25,000 when I first started. Went on to raise about $15 million the first 3 years. We turned a profit in the third year. We never needed cash again for another 15 years at least.
Yeah.
Because we had so much cash flow growth, and we became a leading digital media property. So that's our early history. That's part one of Newsmax.
And then what is the company today? Like, how many people do you reach regularly, and how many social media followers do you have across the platform?
We now have 3 OTT and cable channels. We have the main Newsmax channel, which we spent maybe $150 million in capital to build that out. And Q1, the Nielsen ratings, we were number 5 in all of cable.
Astounding.
There's hundreds of cable channels. We were number 4 in cable news, nipping on the heels of CNN's ratings. We're doing exceedingly well for not a lot of money.
Yeah.
And when you look back at Fox, they spent billions to build what they have today. And then we launched a streaming channel recently, Newsmax 2, in recent years. That's doing fantastically well. We just posted it to our website, newsmax.com, that 22 million viewers tuned in the month of May, up 25% from last year. And almost every program seeing double-digit increases on. That's the streaming channel, the fast channel. So the Rokus, the Zumos, Plutos, on your Samsung, we're there.
Yeah.
We're in 47 TV markets across the nation on digital channels. So that's got a huge reach. We have the World at War. We have a military history channel that runs on YouTube TV and a growing number of cable systems. We're very excited about the future of that. We have an app, a streaming app called Newsmax Plus. We have around 300,000 paid subscribers to that. It's growing. That's about $50 a year. And you can get all our channels and a lot of other programming. We're hoping to build that out for family-friendly entertainment and news across the country. And then we have our digital properties. We have health and financial newsletters. We have a book publisher. So, and yes, at the end of the day, we reach about 40 million people regularly. And Reuters' study last year showed that we were one of the top 12 media brands in the United States for news.
I wanted to ask you something up front, which I think most people have a perception. Obviously, when you think of Newsmax, you might think of conservative, right-wing, pro-Trump media. Is that a fair assessment? How do you see the business today, and how do you see it kind of evolving over time?
Well, I think, truth in advertising, I always say, and I always have said, that Newsmax is independent news. We're not owned by any major corporation or any political party.
Yep.
We're independent news with a conservative perspective. And what that means to me is we lean conservative, but we're open to other ideas. And we certainly have always wanted liberal opinion, democratic opinion on Newsmax. We're not RNC talking points, never have been, never will be.
Yep.
We're not Donald Trump talking points. We have a lot of criticism that we air on TV and on our web of the president, who's a longtime friend of mine. But you remember, I knew him when he was a Democrat.
Yeah.
And I was certainly a conservative back then, and I've known him for a long time, and I like him, and I respect him. We don't always agree on every issue, but I do feel like, we should give him a fair hearing. And I think he likes the fact that where Fox was freezing him out for a while there.
Like in his initial run, you mean?
Well, in 2016, they opposed him in the primary.
Totally, yeah.
In the 2020 election, he says they opposed him. They certainly had a lot of negative stuff going into that election. In 2024, after the 2020 election, Rupert Murdoch sends out an email, I want that guy to be a non-entity, I think he said.
Yikes.
And they froze him off of Fox for a while, but his family, his surrogates, people that are all over TV now, and you'll see on Fox now, the Pam Bondis of the world and others, they weren't on Fox. They were not allowed on Fox. Don Jr. was banned. And that, look, it's a free country. Fox can do whatever we want. I have always felt like you should have both sides.
Yep.
And so we get labeled, and it's become even more so because of the rise of Trump, and the media doesn't want him to have any attention. And they'll say this or that. We were always considered conservative. This right-wing label is something new that they're putting on everybody that disagrees with the left's agenda,
yep.
The DEI agenda. And I'm old school. I like liberal thinking and opinion to be discussed. But I don't think that we should label people. I don't call them left-wing, even though the New York Times sure as heck looks at.
When you look at your reach and, you're fortunate to sit under the tent and see all the demographics and the people that you're interacting with for the most part, is there a generational strategy in place to attract younger, let's say conservative viewers or consumers of political content for Newsmax? Because I think somehow, at least my amateur perspective was, 5 years ago, the conservative leaning folks just kind of automatically felt, well, what, younger people vote the other way, so we're not going to spend a lot of money on that. How do you view it?
I don't really care how they vote. I mean, that's a personal decision people make. I'm not targeting voters or non-voters. I like the baby boomer. We call it the baby boomer plus audience. It's just anyone over 45. So that includes a lot of Gen Xers.
Yeah.
And that audience has over 70% of the purchasing power of the U.S. economy. I think it's crazy that Madison Avenue and every major brand in the country focuses on a 20-something group that has no money. News, by its nature, is going to draw an older audience. Our age averages are probably a little less than some of the other major competitors. But, look, if you get somebody 45 in news, they're a very serious person.
Yep.
They're very serious professionally in business. They care about the country. They're a good viewer. So, there's the 35 to 64 key demo. Those numbers have been rising really big for us in the past couple of years. We're happy about that. But as to us trying to develop a business strategy to get a 25-year-old to start watching when they don't normally watch news, I think it's a mistake. And a lot of companies have gone down the tubes trying to do it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Look, Tom, look at Facebook. It only started making money when the college kids turned it off and grandma started going to Facebook.
So we've talked about their incredible reach and where Newsmax fits into the current news ecosystem. But one thing we haven't covered is their decision to go public in March of this year. I wanted to get some insight from Chris into the rationale behind the IPO and the timing of it.
Well, I saw our growth after the 20 election. Into the 20 election. We just had rising growth going into that election. And the fact we were getting so close to overtaking CNN, I believe that it would be good for the company to have thousands of partners, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of supporters that are co-owners of Newsmax in that effort. And the capital would be helpful in our efforts to expand the company more quickly, to seize more territory and more business opportunities. So we decided to go ahead with it. I think it's turned out to be a great choice. We raised $300 million in the pre-IPO and the IPO together. And then we had, I think, a historic New York Stock Exchange listing. As you said, the first Reg A to go public on the big board. And I think we're going to continue breaking records.
Yeah, it's all really impressive. And now that you have a public company, there's a lot of scrutiny on capital allocation and things like that. Without giving anything competitive away, what are the buckets where you think allocating capital gets the best return for the company?
There's three areas that we see of significant growth, and all three of them are really good for us. One is the cable channel is still growing. And even though it's a legacy media and it's a declining market, we believe there's huge opportunity for us because there still will be a lot of cable subscribers looking for live news, live sports, and we're it. So we still see a lot of growth in our cable licensing fees and our audience potential there. And then second, our streaming channel, Newsmax 2, is also growing rapidly. We see that as off the charts because it's free and there's not as much competition for quality content in the free streaming area. And third, in the Plus service. So all of those three buckets, I would say, are where we see the most return with the Newsmax Plus and 2 and the main cable channel.
I would assume there's so many avenues of growth here for your audience because they're interested in many things beyond politics, as you kind of just mentioned. You know, when you look out 5 years, what do you think this could be? Certainly without giving away your strategy.
Well, one thing I do say about the company now, and I think it portends well for the future, is I say we're all for all.
Yeah.
We're on all platforms for all people, right? We're on almost all platforms that are out there. We have text messaging if you want news. We have emails. We have print even. We have a magazine.
Yeah.
We have multiple TV channels. There's a lot for you to access Newsmax. And I think we are really innovating on that. Most media companies, they still can't break out of their traditional buckets.
Yep.
And we're the only digital media company that has successfully gone to cable and built a cable channel.
Yeah.
That's never happened before. Nobody's done what we've done. So that's like historic there. And so the digital is still going to be the most powerful driver of news and information in the years to come. And I think we are prepared for that transformation. We have a 25-year track record, right, of constantly innovating in each of these areas. And the cable is just the latest. People, I remember when I started in 2014, people said, you're crazy. They're not even accepting any more cable channels. We got on every cable system within 3 or 4 years. And they said, well, you're crazy. You're never going to need a license fee. We get cable license fee from every operator. And we've been renewing upon those. And the rates are going up. So we break through these things. And I think, again, it's the quality product, understanding your audience, super serving that audience. I remind investors, and if they go to our newsmaxinvest.com page, we actually have an article from the Financial Times, which came out right after we went public. And it was the only article I thought of all of these written that understood the company business model and why we can be so successful.
Well, people should go check that out. The other thing I wanted to ask your opinion on, Chris, was obviously when Trump took the White House again, all of a sudden, everyone woke up to the podcast business. How do you see that landscape? How's Newsmax participation in that, kind of either now or over the next few years? Because it certainly seems to have gotten everyone's attention.
Well, in our developmental years, we've been very focused on the TV channels, and we still are, but we have been growing our podcasts. We have a number of podcasts we do. We do a daily news brief with Tony Marino, who's a well-known radio host. We have 2 programs Rob Carson, who's one of our TV hosts, has a show that we do every day on podcast. One of our leading hosts, Greg Kelly, has a podcast. And we're looking forward to really growing those podcasts over time. They are very influential, but the big money right now, the most financially successful stuff is television in our mind. And then podcast is growing, but it's also highly competitive and the barrier to entries are very low.
Yeah.
You just need a microphone and a laptop. So there'll be always a lot of competition. I met a lot of famous people that go on to podcasts and they'll call me and say, why am I not making any money? I heard everybody makes money on podcasts. And it's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, for sure. How about international? I know you've announced some distribution agreements recently, but it seems like a huge opportunity for Newsmax.
Yeah, underline the word huge. I mean, America's 5% of the world's population and 20% of its GDP. So you have this mammoth marketplace and they like American brands. They like American news and information. So we're now currently available in about 100 countries across 5 continents where we have arrangements and licensing deals where people can take one of our English language channels and air them in their local market. We just recently started dubbing in a groundbreaking deal that we've done with Latin America DirecTV and Super Canal in the Dominican Republic to dub into Spanish, live dubbing. And I'm told that's going really well. And we're excited about the potential in rolling that out across markets. So they'll be able to watch Newsmax, our nightly show with Rob Schmidt and Greta Van Susteren, et cetera, and hear it in their local native language. That's a pretty amazing feat that nobody has done yet that I know of in any serious way. We also are licensing our brand for local news partners. We have a deal in the Balkans with Telekom Serbia. They have about 200 staff and their operations there. It's really a model of what others can do. And we've just announced deals where a couple of cable operators in Israel, Armenia, and it's going to continue to grow throughout the world.
Talk about technology. Talk about AI. How is Newsmax investing or understanding that to help the business, move forward in the future?
Well, I guess you could say you could never put enough money into AI.
Yeah.
Warren Buffett famously called the IT department infinity because it always needed an infinite amount of money.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful on how you spend it. We're looking at AI very carefully, like the dubbing of our channel is just an easy one, right? But in terms of editorial content on television, on the website, we are starting to integrate that, but we're being very careful about its use. I think it's going to lower production costs across the board, but it's also going to cheapen the value of content too.
I was going to ask you, if you were put yourself back as a hardworking journalist and all this stuff is happening around you, how are they going to compete with this overwhelming, what would seem to be a robotic thing going on all around them? It's going to be a wild landscape, I think, in the next 5 years, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, there'll be a lot of pressure that's going to undercut the value, not just for journalists, but a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be using AI for things that took hours to do. Somebody just did a study for us. They sent over the recent Warner Brothers decision to divest their cable channels, including CNN.
Yeah.
And we asked AI to do a study, and they did the same exact study. And so somebody's sending this out as a work product. They obviously just did it as that. But in the old days, it would have taken 20 hours to put something like that together.
Yeah.
So it's revolutionizing the business.
I always love asking these questions. I've been around public CEOs for my entire career, over 30 years. And when you're a public company CEO and you meet with a series of investors, sometimes I always feel like the person on the other side of the table is really quiet. And I always take that to be they're either very smart or they just don't get it at all. People that don't seem to get it, what do you think they miss about the company and the value within the company that they're kind of not seeing? What's underappreciated about Newsmax and the value of the enterprise?
Well, I think they have to understand that the reach, and you said it earlier, is so big, so significant, so huge, that even though our revenues are relatively small, we did about $170 million last year, and those revenues have been going up fairly consistently. that we have a lot of room to fill because our reach is so big. For instance, our Q1 ratings were up 50% over last year.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But it's not linear. You don't get the revenue the next day that you get that number increase, but over time,
right,
you do. So it's a little bit of a lag effect on the ratings and the success and the reach. But if you look at the top 12 Reuters Institute media news brands that came out last year, we're there. But every one of the others are multi-billion-dollar companies and all have very significant revenues. And so we're just a later arrival, but we're going to fill those shoes.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of room for us to grow, but we are growing. And we've already built out sort of the house. The house is the audience. We built that out. We now just have to go through and do the infrastructure that generates the revenues.
Yeah.
That was the point, the Financial Times article, when they looked at our numbers, they said, essentially, there's a lot of value, hidden value here, because they have so much more room to grow into the audience that they already have.
You know, it's funny how different industries are valued differently, whether that's smart or not smart or good or bad, it doesn't matter. But, you know, when you go back and let's say you look at Twitter in the beginning, when they were raising private rounds, I think they weren't valued off of revenue or like earnings per share, right? They were valued off of the number of people that they reach. And they probably put a metric on that value, lifetime value of a client or whatever they called it. But like, I kind of see a parallel there. If you grew up in Silicon Valley and were financed by all those VCs there, you know, it would be more of like a total reach and how fast you're growing story versus like the traditional like revenue or earnings per share or whatever, you know, equation they want to put on it. It's just, you know, I mean, like you're going to have the ability to reach like 50, 100 million people at some point.
When I was on Squawk Box, I said, look, to Joe Kerner, I said, we're a growth company. And even though we've been around for 25 years, people say, how can you say?
Yeah.
Well, because we're an evolving cable and OTT streaming company. That part of the business is relatively new. We're relatively new to that. And we're growing very fast in that area and very significantly. And so that's what makes us a growth company and why you can't affix the normal PE ratios to us.
That was Chris Ruddy, founder and CEO of Newsmax. It's an incredible success story from a small digital news outlet 30 years ago to a multimedia empire that reaches 40 plus million people across all platforms. They're innovative, smart with their capital allocation, and there's just a huge total addressable market worldwide for the content they create. Special thanks to Chris Ruddy for sharing his thoughts with us today. It'll be interesting to watch as the company expands its product offerings and global footprint. If you found this episode insightful, please subscribe to the show on your podcast app. Throw us a 5-star rating. It'll really help us grow the show and get more interesting voices on the podcast. I'm Tom Ryan, and we'll see you next time back in the arena.
References to specific stocks are not intended to be recommendations for specific trading behavior. Comments presented on this podcast are intended for informational and educational purposes only, and do not represent opinions or recommendations on whether to buy, sell, or hold shares of a particular stock. All investors are advised to conduct their own independent research into individual stocks before making a trading decision. In addition, investors are advised that past stock performance is no guarantee of future price performance.